Thank you everyone for joining us here today. My name's Anita Corbett. I use she, her pronouns. I am a professor of biology at Emory University, but I'm joining you here today in my role as one of the Public Affairs Advisory Committee, or PAC, members for ASB&B, and I co-chair this group on the next generation of scientists working group. And so we organized this webinar, and when I say we, I really mean the awesome people at ASB&B, this webinar to increase awareness of the opportunity to serve as an early career reviewer for NIH study sections, and give you some of the information about that opportunity. This is really an amazing way to learn what reviewers are looking for in your grants. And so my job is to serve as the moderator. I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A, but the star of the show today is our speaker, Dr. Elyse Schauwecker. She is a scientific review officer, and maybe she'll tell us exactly what that means at NIH CSR. So they've already got some acronyms there. And so I will turn it over to Elyse to introduce herself. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great, thanks. Hello, everybody. Good day. Thank you for inviting me to speak to the ASB&B. My name, again, is Elyse Schauwecker, and I'm a scientific review officer at the Center for Scientific Review at the National Institutes of Health, or NIH. And as a scientific review officer, or SRO for short, I manage the review of grant applications submitted to the NIH. So for my talk today, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about NIH, give you a little bit of background about where the Center for Scientific Review fits in, so you can understand how we use reviewers and what an early career reviewer would be doing. So although I'm sure you're all aware, I thought I'd give you some background on NIH. NIH is, again, the steward of medical and behavioral research for the nation. It's the largest public funder of biomedical research in the world, investing more than $40 billion annually in health research for the American people. Its mission is to seek fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. And though many of you may be familiar with NIH's support of clinical research to advance prevention, treatments, and cures for disease and disability, a large part of NIH's mission and role in the biomedical enterprise is to support basic biomedical research. Funding for basic science research accounts for approximately 51% of the NIH budget, and peer review is the cornerstone of the NIH grants process, helping ensure that NIH grant applications are evaluated in a way that is fair, equitable, timely, and free of bias. Now, with regard to the structure of NIH, NIH is made up of what are called 27 institutes and centers. Each has a specific agenda, often focusing on particular diseases or body systems. The 24 of these at the top, sort of organized into the 4 rows with 6 each, are called institutions or centers. And you could actually, an application can request funding from any one of these 24 institutions or centers, sometimes called ICs. CSR, located at the bottom, we are the Center for Scientific Review. While we manage a large portion of the review for all of these institutes, we don't fund grants. We are responsible for the first level of review. So when you submit a grant, it's assigned not only to a funding institute, but also to a review panel or study section for review. The majority of study sections at NIH are run by CSR, or the Center for Scientific Review. This is a small sample of the people that work at the Center for Scientific Review. Our main role, again, is review. We are the gateway for NIH grant applications and the review of those grant applications with regard to scientific and technical merit. We organize peer review groups or study sections that evaluate the majority of research grant applications sent to NIH. And our mission is to ensure that, again, each and every grant application receives fair, independent, and timely scientific review, free from inappropriate influences, so that NIH can fund the most promising research. Again, and CSR is the gateway for NIH grant applications. I'm going to start with a brief overview of CSR's role so you know where we fit within NIH and why we're actually invested in the Early Career Reviewer Program. CSR organizes about 200 chartered study sections. These chartered study sections at CSR review most investigator-initiated research applications, such as R01s, R21s, and R03s, and they include both regular and temporary reviewers. We conduct initial scientific merit review of most of these applications, and about 76% of NIH grant applications are reviewed at CSR. That's about 64,000 applications, and it takes the work of about 18,000 reviewers. So it's quite a big endeavor. So as I mentioned, CSR is considered the gateway of NIH applications. Every application that's submitted to NIH arrives initially at the Center for Scientific Review, specifically at the top at the Division of Receipt and Referral. Once your applicant organization has submitted an application, it goes here. DRR, or the Division of Receipt and Referral, is responsible for processing all the applications sent to NIH. It plays an active role in problem solving and policy compliance. Administrative staff perform a number of policy checks, compliance for timeliness, formatting, and completeness. And then the application is assigned to one or more institutes or centers for potential funding. And then applications are also assigned to an institute review group, a study section assignment. This application review takes place in two stages. The first level of review is the stage where early career reviewers participate. It's the part where a study section is taking place at a CSR study section. Following the assignment of an application to a particular study section, the review process is managed by a scientific review officer, or SRO, and carried out by recruited reviewers. This process takes about 3 to 4 months from assignment of the application to that study section to the release of a document at the end of the review called a summary statement, which describes the results of the review. During this initial stage, the person that is responsible for the application and its review is the scientific review officer. The scientific review officer's job is to select reviewers, to recruit reviewers to the panel based on their knowledge of their field and the expertise. They manage confidentiality. They manage conflicts of interest between reviewers and applications. They schedule and manage the study section meeting, and they prepare written summary statements on the peer findings of scientific merit. The scientific review officer works to ensure the integrity of the review process. Confidentiality is at the heart of that review process, so all review materials and meeting proceedings are considered confidential. After that review process is done, the results of the review are sent both to the applicant, principal investigator, and the program official at the corresponding funding institute. And the application now goes to what's called the level 2 part of review, where it will be considered for potential funding. The principal point of contact for an applicant to interact with then would be what's called a program officer, or PO, at a particular funding institute. Based on the results of the review, program or institute scientific priorities, and funds available, a decision is made in consultation with that funding institute's advisory council whether or not to support or fund that grant application. So the entire process from an application being submitted to a funding decision takes about 6 to 9 months, in most cases almost a year, until funds are actually received. In general, there are 3 main review cycles a year where an application is received, reviewed, and examined for funding decisions made at a meeting. Since there are 3 cycles a year, the peer review process also occurs 3 times a year. Each process is always going on and overlapping with another, but for a different review cycle. Any questions so far, Anita?
I was going to ask you one question because I think it's an incredibly important point to make sure people understand, is that the CSR and the study sections do not make decisions about funding a grant, correct?
That is correct. So we call it the F word, and you are not allowed to say the F word in review. So again, our name sort of implies what we do. We're the Center for Scientific Review. We only do review. It's a little bit like separation of church and state. So we leave the funding decisions up to the institutes. When a particular announcement comes out about a request for applications in a particular area, the first part of that funding opportunity announcement will talk about what the institute, what types of applications the institute is interested in getting. We in review don't care about the institute's priorities. We just care whether the research is going to have scientific and technical merit based on reviewers' expertise in the field. So they're evaluating without considering what the interests of the funding institute are. So we really just care about the science itself and not whether it's going to be supported or whether it should be supported. We are advisory. The first level of review is advisory to the institutes. They can agree with the decision that the review panel has made, or they could completely disagree with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I want to give you one question. So as I mentioned in the chat, please feel free to enter questions in the chat or in the Q&A where they can be anonymous. So we have a question in the Q&A that is this issue of any conflict of interest between applicants and reviewers and how that is evaluated, because I think this is something people are pretty worried about, right? You're sending your brilliant ideas off to a panel of unknowns to, have them evaluate your ideas, but they're also obviously reading them. So I don't know if you want to speak to that just quickly before you move on.
So I'm going to say there's really three issues that sort of go into the review. There's confidentiality. So all information submitted to reviewers is confidential. It is not to be shared. It's not to be passed around the table. It's not to be talked about with any fellow other scientist. It is confidential. And reviewers all have to sign sort of an oath of disclosure of confidentiality that will not happen. The second one is sort of a peer review integrity. We really demand integrity, and that is that you're not going to take information and use it for your own benefit. And the last one is conflict of interest. And conflict of interest is if you are a reviewer on the panel, you are automatically in conflict with any applications from your organization. So if you're a reviewer on the panel, Anita, you could obviously not be in the room when any applications from Emory are being discussed, because it could potentially benefit you if your institution gets more money. If you have a close collegial relationship or collaborate with somebody who writing a grant, or you've co-written on a manuscript in the last 3 years with somebody, you are in conflict with that individual. It would be viewed that you could not be unbiased in your evaluation of their project. So at the very beginning, even before assignments of applications are made, we send out a list of the applications just with the name of the personnel involved and the title of the application and the institutions are involved. And we do our own check as SROs to determine if there's a conflict. And then we ask also the reviewers to determine if there's a conflict. And a conflict could be, I would really prefer not to evaluate this person's application. They were a prior mentor. They did not accept me in a job interview. Anything, you can declare a conflict of interest so that you are out of the room during the discussion of that application. And those situations are not unusual. So we really want that to be free so that that's very clear that there can be conflicts of interest.
Great. I think we're ready to let you move on, and we'll see. I'll keep you apprised of other questions.
Great. So again, how can one learn about this review process? So there's this delightful webpage which lists all of these different little vignettes to give you information. And one of the center ones that I'll talk about is becoming a reviewer. The best way to learn about peer review is really to sort of be an observer and see what the study section process looks like. I will admit, before serving as a reviewer, it's a little bit of a black box. I really didn't know what I was getting into. As a PI, I was obviously very anxious about it. I'd luckily just received an R01, but I really didn't know what to expect. I was happy that I'd gotten supported, but I really didn't know what had happened during the review process. And so being a reviewer is really a great way to have a window into that process. Our goal in developing this program was one, we thought that it would really improve peer review. We really want to diversify our panels. We want to have people at different stages of their career, in different geographical locations, different genders, different ethnicities, because the applications coming in are truly diverse. And so we need that diversity on our panels in terms of demographics and career stage. And two, it really is incredibly beneficial if you want to write a competitive grant application, if you know what are the criteria that an individual is going to be evaluating, what is really important? Is it the science that's so important? Is it the way it's put together? Is it a combination of both of those? What really helps? And we really want to make the review process transparent so that grant applicants know how their applications are going to be evaluated. It's a very complex process with many nuances. Serving as a reviewer is a much better way to understand the evaluation of grant applications than reading all of the web pages that NIH has on review criteria. So again, we really want to help train qualified scientists to become critical and well-trained reviewers. We want to expose investigators to the peer review experience, and we want to enrich the existing pool of NIH reviewers. So the basics. In order to make sure you know how to navigate submission, there are opportunities for you to participate. So early career scientists can apply to CSR's Early Career Reviewer Program. The link is at the very bottom of the slide instead of at the top. ECRs serve as an early career reviewer one time on a standing study section. You review a total of 2 applications as a third reviewer. And what does that mean, reviewing 2 applications as a third reviewer? Generally, for most applications, there are 3 reviewers assigned to an individual application. A third reviewer doesn't mean that you're doing less of an important job than reviewer 1. You're still writing the same amount of information. You're still having to fill out a critique. And it is the combined expertise of those 3 reviewers that will provide an effective evaluation. You're reviewing only 2 applications because we want to give you something to do, but an average load for most reviewers is 8 to 10 applications. So you're getting a much smaller load because again, it's your first time. It takes quite a bit of training to figure out what is the language that we're looking for in the critique, how do we evaluate for, what are you looking for, how do I construct it? So you're writing a full critique, you're participating in the full 2 days of the review meeting. You're scoring all those applications that either you weren't assigned to and those that you're not in conflict with. So you are in the room, nowadays virtual room, for the entire 2 days of the meeting. So you're going to be giving feedback on the applications that have been assigned to you, as well as you may chime in on applications that weren't assigned to you. Nobody knows that you are an early career reviewer. They just know that you're a reviewer sitting on this panel just as they are. Qualifications for the Early Career Reviewer Program. You have to have at least 1 year of experience as a full-time faculty member, meaning that you've been an assistant professor or an equivalent title in a similar role. Postdoctoral fellows are unfortunately not eligible, so you do have to have a faculty position of some kind. It doesn't necessarily have to be tenured, but it has to be a faculty position. You have not served on an NIH study section in any capacity. In other words, you have not participated in this process before for an NIH study section. You have not successfully competed for an R01. What does that mean in NIH language? You haven't gotten an R01 or equivalent application as you being the PI, being the principal investigator for that application. You could have inherited an R01 because of the demise or leaving of another PI, but you yourself did not go through that peer review process. So you've never gotten that. You have to have also submitted a grant application to NIH as a principal investigator and received a summary statement. So examples of this commonly are you've submitted an F31, you submitted an F32, you were on some kind of a K award, and you received a summary statement for that. So you've at least are familiar with the grant application process, but that is about it. For research, you have evidence of an active independent research program. And what are we considered active and independent research program? You have publications, you've had presentations, you've been a supervisor of student projects, you've had some type of institutional research support. And then lastly, you have at least 2 senior authored research publications in peer-reviewed journals. So at least 1 publication since your doctoral degree, and at least 1 publication in the last 2 years. You can include in-press publications can be considered. Any questions on this so far?
Yeah, let me follow up because I'm really glad a couple people put a couple questions because I share this experience with trying to have some colleagues. So one person wrote and said, you know, I have colleagues who have joined the ECR review program for nearly a year. So I know there's Mallory already put the link in, but have never been called to review. And I'll have to say that this has been my experience too in recommending it to people. And usually what I then do is ask them to reach out to a specific SRO, and then they get included. And so do you have thoughts or comments about that, or do you have advice? Because like I said, I'm really glad someone posed this question because this is some of my experience as well.
So it's great because obviously we don't see that from our side. What we see is we are, as an SRO, I am panicked each round to identify early career reviewers because my particular panel, acute neural injury and epilepsy, deals with acute and chronic injury in regard to traumatic brain injury, stroke, epilepsy, spinal cord injury. And there are, in the ECR database, if I look, maybe 15 potential reviewers that show up. Now, there are 1,000 people in the database, but only 15 that have put in qualifying terms that are showing up related to that. I could go through line by line the 1,000 people, but obviously there's a problem with that, right? So I'm going to use the search engine tools that I can. So I think, unfortunately, there can be problems if someone doesn't really put in great descriptors for their research. So if they put in something like plasticity, signal transduction cascade, that's a really, really broad term. And the system might not necessarily identify those. I absolutely, and this is, I think, coming up in one of my slides, if you can look at the study section descriptions and come up with a couple of choices that you think, hey, this seems like a really good panel. I'd like to hear more about the type of applications, and contact the SRO. That's the best way. I will tell you, I have never been contacted by an ECR. Ever.
Yeah. So if anybody's out there who works on spinal cord injury, please, please reach out. And that's the experience I've had. Typically is when people do reach out, they reach out for an appropriate study section. Often they get advice from some of their senior colleagues about this one would be a good one. Can I ask, in the next question, there's a number in the chat Q&A now, so I'll try and get to them without cutting off the rest of your presentation, but and there's my phone is now ringing. Does the requirement have a senior authored paper? So I'm not sure what that means, because to me, senior authored means from your lab, and most people don't have 2 papers from their lab.
So again, I think many of us that started off as PIs talked to the committee about this because, again, I don't know that I had a senior author publication in my first 2 years of running a lab. I think I might have gotten one close to my 3rd year but I actually probably got my R01 before I had a senior author publication, just because of the delay from the postdoc, manuscripts are still coming out. So I think there's quite a bit of flexibility. Again, my experience may be different than others. I've expressed that concern, and that concern has certainly been expressed to the committee. But that is what they are sort of looking at. But I will say I have not seen them turn down. Who they have really turned down is someone who's an associate professor level, who's been around for a while, who's been an associate professor for 4 or 5 years, more of what I'd call a mid-career scientist. And they've been turned down because they come across as more of a mid-career scientist. And this is really for early career scientists. So there is on the second slide, let me just go to the second slide. This bottom link where it's an email, some of the checks for eligibility are automated. Errors do happen. Absolutely. If you don't have those, there are a lot of workarounds. And again, I will just say, SROs are very concerned about whether there will be enough early career reviewers. We are very, very concerned. The committee keeps telling us there are plenty. We are anxious about it, really anxious about it. So I think there's a lot of attention being made to make sure that everyone feels comfortable that there are enough available and they are getting utilized effectively. It's not an uncommon thing, though, that I have heard people being on the list for a year and wondering, am I still active on the list? Are you seeing my name show up? And knowing that. And we have talked to the committee about making that a bit more transparent. Note to the early, you are still on the list, letting you know that.
I see another comment here just quickly. It says, it says, do we need to include in our CV that we've already applied for an NIH grant as PI and received the summary statement? Is there a specific CV template, right? Because you may have, if you've gotten an F31 or an F32 along the way, clearly that would be on your CV or your bio sketch. But if you've applied and not gotten one, even if you've gotten a summary statement, technically that would make you eligible. So I don't usually put my rejected grants on a bio sketch, but it sounds like maybe for this specific mechanism that might be useful.
Okay, so behind the curtain, I will tell you, we have a database that tells us, we could look up any applicant's name and we can see how many grants you've applied for and if there was a summary statement for it. So we have all the checks and balances for that. So I would just put on your CV what you would normally put on for any job that you were applying for or passing on your CV to a colleague. So if there's a grant that you've submitted and you got it, congratulations. And I would put that on there. If you didn't, I would not worry about it. I guess you could say it in, I haven't looked at the actual form to know if there's a place where you can say I've received, I have received a summary statement and it was for my F32. I don't know that. But I wouldn't probably put it in my CV because that would just seem a little awkward, I would think, to include it there. This second, I think this third bullet point really highlights the issue that you brought up before. It is incredibly useful to identify study sections that fit your area of expertise. So on the right bottom of this slide is a hyperlink that takes you to, there are 201 standing study sections that cover all different topics. They're listed alphabetically. They have these delightful acronyms that sometimes do or don't agree with the study section description, just because apparently it requires an act of Congress to go through and change the acronym. But look through, they have a description of the study section, and it really can give you an idea of whether this is this would fit you. These are kind of your people where you'd like to see grants reviewed. And there hopefully would be at least 2 or 3 that you could choose from to list there.
All right, I think you can probably get a number of the questions were the senior author papers definitely tripped up a number of people. So that is a number of questions here. So continue, and then I'll keep scrolling through and I'll let you know if I see some more follow-up.
And I want everybody to know that I am going to get back to the early career reviewer people who are in charge of it and give them your feedback so that they can, this is a great way for them to get feedback on where are concerns with regard to the process. So I think I've said everything here, but what you need for the application process, I put the link in at the very top. You have to, like with everything these days, create a login and a password to get into this sort of portal. You need your CV in either a Word or a PDF format. You will need to create an NIH Commons ID. If you have already applied for a fellowship before, you have that. Your institute may be, your institute where you're working may be able to help you with that. You can select up to 4 CSR study sections. This has always been a little bit confusing, just so you know, there are reviews that take place at the individual institutes for funding, but they are not, they generally don't do R01s, R21s, and R03s. So even though they have study sections, they don't have an early career reviewer program. So this program only exists at CSR, where we, because of the fact that we review the parent R01s, the R21s, and the R03s. And then the application process is really a check. It seemingly takes seconds, is what I've understood. So you apply and you literally will get an email within 24 hours. If you don't get an email within 24 hours, I would contact this email listed below. Just so you know, if I'm looking for an ECR, I'm going to be looking at 3 specific times of the year. If our review meetings are happening, and so we just finished one in June, the next time for most is October, and then the next time is February or March. I'm going to look about 3 months ahead of time to those review meetings for any reviewers once applications are all in. So I'm going to be looking in August for reviewers to participate in the October reviews. I'm going to be looking in late December, probably late December, mid-December for February. I'm going to be looking in April for June. So even if you're applying, there's going to be there may be a lag time of 2 months where you don't hear from a scientific review officer. And that's really because we're kind of focused on now getting into the applications, answering any questions about the review process from the reviewers. Although the processes are overlapping, we can be a little bit single-mindedly focused at times, and we may need reminders if you send an email to us.
And let me ask a question, because this also, sorry, this goes with my experience as well. As someone put in the question, do R35 ESI awards count as R01 equivalents for
Yes,
which would make you ineligible?
Ineligible.
I will say I have a colleague who wasn't accepted as an ECR until she got her R35. So
the slide, so the recent one is that may have changed, because again, we used to accept associate professors who were fairly early in their career. That has changed as well. So it's no associate professors. But what I've heard is the R35 is considered an R01 equivalent.
Yeah. Now, she was told she would not be eligible until she got a grant in that particular case. So, I mean, there's clearly some, again, if you're reaching out to individual SROs, I think sometimes you are going to get different answers that
yes.
maybe but the feedback to them is really valuable. I think, as we're hearing, they really do take feedback to heart. So, please put feedback, and I think Mallory, they can also send feedback to you. Would you share it? Yes. Okay, so after you apply, you'll receive an email letting you know if you've been accepted or not. Generally, this comes within 24 hours. Some institutions, I'll just say this, some institutions block emails coming from NIH. It's a terrible idea, because if you want to know if you've gotten that grant, but there are a number of universities that block it as spam. So if you haven't, maybe check your spam folder, make sure. But I know that like Columbia University, for example, is one that often blocks NIH email. If you've been accepted in the program, your name is entered into this large database, which SROs can use to identify you.
We have to recruit 2 early career reviewers for each meeting. And so we try to identify people as soon as possible. I will say this, I've had to turn down early career reviewers from participating in my meeting because of a schedule conflict. They can't participate both days in the meeting. And really, to get the full experience out, you really want to just be able to participate in both days of the meeting. So what I have done for some is, if they can't participate that round, I've said, could I sign you up for the next round? Because I generally have my dates for my meetings a year in advance, because I have a lot of clinician scientists and their schedules are really impacted, as are a lot of the basic scientists who have huge teaching obligations. So I need to let them know in advance, kind of figure out within their schedule, do I need to get someone to teach my course for me so I can participate? So make sure that if you can't participate in the full 2 days, say that you'd be willing to participate in a different round, or is there somebody that could, another meeting that you could participate in? And again, call attention to yourself by emailing the SRO, so that this is, again, that same website that lists those 201 standing study sections. And when you click on a particular panel, so this one, molecular neuropharmacology and signaling, you'll get a picture sometimes of the SRO and their email address and phone number. It'll include sort of this description in paragraph form of what the study section is. Beneath that will be bullet points of really specific focuses. What are sort of the methodologies, the approaches that the study section evaluates? Do they do pharmacokinetics, for example, on this one? Do they have pharmacodynamics? Is that something? How broad are the molecular mechanisms? What are the animal models that they'll take? So there'll be a little bit more information there. You would email the SRO, say, I'm an ECR, I've been accepted in the program, I'm in the database, I would like to participate. Can you let me know if you need any information from me? And that's really the best way to do it. If you want to be very proactive, that's very, very helpful. If you're invited to serve, you're going to work closely with the scientific review officer. So I just want to say, early career reviewers are going to get a lot of training in peer review. They're going to include strategies for reading through the applications, the definition for each of the review criteria, how you're going to select a score, how to write a critique. It's a lot of one-on-one training, because even if you've done manuscript review before, our particular template is a little bit persnickety with regard to the language that we want reviewers to use, and sort of the famous score driving criteria and sort of a language that we use. You're going to be included in all pre-meeting orientations or training sessions. I actually prefer to do one-on-one training with my early career reviewers individually, just because I think each person may have unique questions. It also allows me to answer questions about the broader process of NIH, and what do I do if I want to submit an application, and how does that differ? But that's really up to the individual SRO themselves. You'll get training on grant review and writing. You'll review, we'll ask you to submit one of your critiques before the critique deadline. We'll go over it usually one-on-one over, did you write too much? Areas that you need to sort of trim down on. Written or verbal feedback will be provided on all your critiques. So we really want to give you a lot of advance notice as to what you should expect. Everyone receives the review assignments 6 weeks before the meeting. I know that sounds like a tremendous amount of time, but even for reviewing 2 applications, you have to think that these could be, and I should say also, your 2 applications that you will be reviewing are R01s. We generally don't give you the smaller R21 or R03s, because R01s are sort of considered the bread and butter of the NIH peer review system. So those applications could be 100 pages in length. That's a lot of pages. The actual research strategy is only 12 pages, but there's a lot of extraneous information in there that can be sometimes a distractor or a detractor from what the research is. And it's a lot of information to process in a short period of time. So you'll really be using the full 6 weeks to try and understand the application and what is required of you and how are you going to translate that into a critique. This is sort of just briefly, I wanted to give some sort of focus as to, the written product from a review meeting is this critique template that you will be filling out. And the critique template at NIH focuses on what's called the overall impact of the application. What reviewers are asked to address is the likelihood of the project to exert a sustained, powerful influence on the research field involved. Is it going to move the field forward in a transformative way? And is the execution of the research really well done? To give going into this overall impact, we have reviewers address 5 review criteria. Significance, should the project be done? Is it filling a missing gap in the field? The investigators, do they have the ability to lead the proposed project? Innovation, is there something technically innovative or conceptually innovative about the project? The approach, is it well executed? Is it rigorous and reproducible, and it has a transparent approach? And the environment, are the right resources and infrastructure there to ensure the success of the project? Each of these criteria, including the overall impact, are scored on a range of 1 to 9. 1 is exceptional, 9 is abysmal. An average score would be a 5. But these, and understanding where am I going to find that and decipher that from this 12 pages of the grant application can be a bit challenging. And again, obviously depends on sort of the grantsmanship of the application that you're reading, whether this is easy to find for the reviewer or they're having to search through the application to find this. But just to give you sort of an idea of so each grant application gets an overall impact score. Those preliminary overall impact scores are submitted to the meeting by reviewers. Prior to the meeting, they're used by the scientific review officer to generate a preliminary list of applications to be discussed. At CSR, we discuss the top 50%, the most meritorious of applications. So this is a streamlining process that focuses on only discussing those best applications. Applications in the lower half are not discussed. They're considered by reviewers to be non-competitive among the pool of applications received. And then after those applications that are discussed go forward, after the meeting, they receive a summary statement that includes a resume of the discussion of those discussed applications that takes place. So that's a little bit about the review criteria. Any more questions?
So I have one that, so I think I know the answer, but I also clicked the answer live button. So what if you were on an institutional K award as part of like the CTSA? I think if you haven't been PI or applied for a grant as PI, it probably would mean you weren't eligible.
Right. If you aren't a PI, then you're eligible.
Well, no, because these are, so you should have applied for a grant and gotten a summary statement. So most of these, like an institutional K award, so there's a KL2, there's a K12, those are like T32 type grants. So the person would not qualify as having applied for and gotten a summary statement by being on one of these type of mechanisms.
That's correct. That's correct.
And then another question that's here, which is, I guess, yeah, here's another one that just popped in, which is a good one. Does the R00 disqualify you, like the R00 component?
No, I don't believe it is considered as
it certainly shouldn't, right? Because it's a very different mechanism. In fact, I think those folks would really significantly benefit from.
Yes, they would.
This. And then this question is maybe not quite so relevant to the ECR point, but someone just asked the general question about how much COVID, well, I guess it could be relevant. People are maybe less likely to have 2 senior author publications due to COVID. And so I guess this goes back to is there some flexibility particularly at this juncture around that requirement, because that does seem like one that would push people past the time to me that would be most useful for them to do this.
Yeah, COVID has changed pretty much everything. So if we give flexibility for a new investigator submitting an R01 and we say there's COVID flexibility, we have to do the same thing for an early career reviewer. So same issue. I will also add one other thing. I've had a number of early career reviewers review on a panel. They have submitted an R01, but it hasn't gone through the review process yet. So you can be an early career reviewer if you have submitted an R01. And in fact, if your meeting is prior to the release of the summary statement, which is pretty much inevitable. So let's say you submitted an R01 for June and you want to participate in an October meeting, you could participate in the October meeting because you won't have that summary statement yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, although you do have to have gotten a summary statement to be eligible.
You have to have gotten a
So
summary
that
statement
can't be
from
the one
some
that-
other application, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, and just as a sort of one point, and you're going through getting the most out of this experience. So when I was junior faculty, there was not the ECR mechanism. I learned the most by far at the first study section that I did go to, which at that time was after I got my first R01, because that's when people usually become eligible. And if you're a woman in the Southeast, you're in a very small, relatively small pool of candidates for review. But I know a number of people who've done it. I've recommended to people. It's incredibly valuable. It's so insightful to look at grants from this perspective and hear what the study section is looking for in the grants. Everyone I know who's done this has been so grateful for the opportunity and has realized so much about the process, and it's informed the way that they think about writing their proposal. So I found it, people have found it incredibly valuable. So
I totally agree. I was like you. I didn't participate in review until I got my first R01 and then left the meeting like, I cannot believe they supported my grant. There is no way. I don't know. They must have been, not really clearly thinking, because boy, I wouldn't have scored my own grant very well. So I think it's really useful. And again, offhand, my impression has been that people who have participated, and again, these are early career reviewers who are obviously interested in the science going on in the panel that they're participating in, they have had a much shorter time to get their first R01 than someone who hasn't participated in the process. So I would say it's 3 times before they get their first R01 as compared to 5 or more if you've never participated in the process. And although you'd think that it's the science that's the most important thing, it's actually, do you make it easy for the reviewers to answer the questions that they need to address in the critique? Is it really well organized? As a former reviewer, if I had to search through the application to find information, the NIH word would be my enthusiasm was slowly diminished, or rapidly diminishing. Because if I am having too much difficulty with reviewing one application, I'm just going to put it aside and move on to the next one. And you don't want anyone to be moving on to the next one or bypassing your application. So the science is important, but it's just, is it really clearly laid out for the person who's not an expert in your field? Because again, if reviewers are getting assigned 9 applications, they're not going to be expert on all of those 9 applications. So some they're going to be a little bit of an arm's reach distance. So I will say the early career reviewers happen to have 2 applications that are pretty much solidly in their wheelhouse because you're getting just 2. But we will also ask if you're willing to stretch a bit just to give an idea of the broad sort of expertise that you're using to evaluate. So I think reading grants and critiques beyond your 2 assignments is a really great idea. I know when I'm recruiting ECRs, I look for ECRs where there would be at least 6 to 7 solid assignments that I could give them. And then I sort of, in talking to them, sort of figure out what are the 2 that would be the sort of the best fit for them. But there are ones that I will reach back to them and say, hey, I was originally considering you for these other 4. You're not in conflict with them. I'd encourage you to, sort of do a brief run through of the aims and the abstract and sort of look at the critiques and let me know if you'd like to participate in discussion, because participating in discussion is really a great way to get a sense of the process, to see what do the other panelists consider important. You know, it really helps. The panelists are really listening to the other discussants to figure out where do they want to vote? How do they want to vote? What's a good point that they haven't thought of? Again, because you're not outed as an early career reviewer, our panels are comprised of members of the study section and then what we call temporary or ad hoc members. So if I have a panel that has 20 members and I have 89 applications in my panel, I'm going to have to recruit another 20 temporary reviewers to have enough reviewers to evaluate my application. So everyone's recruited for their scientific and technical expertise. So please participate in discussions. Nobody, I mean, you're a scientist, you're on the panel because you're a scientist. We want to hear from you. So really important to participate and ask the SRO for feedback at any point. Was that good? Did I do that well? Can I chime in on this? It's very, very helpful. And then I'll just go through this last slide really quickly. Once you participated as an early career reviewer, you have only one time that you can participate as an early career reviewer. So you can't participate again. The cautionary note I would say is once your name is in the database that you participated in one CSR meeting, you are, I'm just going to say, fresh, available reviewers that may be swooped and picked up on by other panelists because you've been trained. You've already undergone the training. The cautionary note is you then won't get just 2 applications. You could get 8 or 9 applications. And if you're really early in your career, there are a lot of demands on your time to get your lab up and running. If you have teaching responsibilities, you have students responsible for. Review is a great thing. It's very rewarding, but protect your time. So if you get recruited to a panel, right away say, can't do it this time, or I'm willing to do it next time, but I really need you to limit me to 5 applications, or I really need you to limit me to this particular. Can you work with that? It's a dialogue between the SRO and the reviewer. If I really need your expertise, we're gonna find a compromise, but really protect your time. You will always get asked to participate, always. So don't feel like if you say no, you'll never get asked again. So that's the only cautionary note, is especially the institutes will pick you up and want to use you.
And especially if you fit, again, I commented, like, I'm in the Southeast in Georgia and, you know, being a woman. So they really do seek diversity on their study sections across geography, across stages, across gender. So there are certain groups of people that I have a female colleague here. She called me because she was so excited that she said no to a study section because I was her mentor and I told her to preserve her time and say no. Whilst I was on the phone with her, the email popped up for me from NIH saying, hey, will you be on this study section? Because she had turned it down. So a couple questions that I think are really good ones. Someone asked, is there formal feedback for the ECRs by the SRO following the study section? Would that be something that would be, you know, an option to find out, like, how'd I do?
We all are asked to do a sort of a post hoc analysis, get together with the ECRs. Some of my ECRs like that, some of them don't want to hear about it. And so I'm willing to give as much information. I also want to get their input. What did you think of the panel? Did you think it was well run? Did you think it was fair? There was fairness involved. Did you feel like you could participate? Did you feel like you were shut down? I want everyone to feel that they're a part of it. So absolutely. And I personally tell ECRs, even after you're off the panel, feel free to contact me if you have any questions at all. So it really is the NIH system. If you can find one person to serve as a resource, that's the great thing. And I think SROs are really willing. We're usually the first point of contact for applications anyways. So we're really willing to do that.
Right. And I think that's such an important point, because I think people are so scared to reach out, but everyone at NIH really is there to help you. They're there to guide you. I had some questions earlier about how do you decide on the mechanism and the institute, and that is definitely reaching out to SROs, program officers, talking to people about what's the best fit for your research area. So another really great question that you as an SRO will probably love to hear is, is there a database that an ECR ineligible assistant professor, so they are ineligible because they've gotten an R01, could put their name into to get the opportunity to review? And I'll let you answer on that.
So we don't have that database. We are at CSR, we are discouraged from getting, we're discouraged from getting assistant or associate professors who have not gotten an R01 or equivalent type application. So if they
But this is a person who got an R01.
So there isn't a database for that. Unfortunately, the way that I have to do that is I have to basically look in our database for similar like-minded people who are in the same area. It would be great if we could have such a database. But again, the number one way that we are expecting is, and how I hear from most, is someone would write to an individual SRO, say, I've gotten one, but I haven't had review experience. I'm going to want that person, I'm going to give them a lower load. And I used a couple people who was their first time in the NIH peer review process. Actually, one was a full professor, had gotten many R01s, but had never participated in peer review, was terrified of it, and got a lighter load because it was their first time and they really didn't know. So that is possible. Unfortunately, I think the best way is you reach out to an SRO.
Yeah, I mean, if you got an R01 from a study section,
yeah,
that's by far your best approach, right? You reach out to that SRO and say, I'm so excited, I got my R01. Clearly, I have appropriate expertise for this study section. I think it'd be incredibly valuable for me to have this experience.
So many of us as SROs, if I have seen a new investigator get their R01 that's come through my panel, I'm going to wait around. And once they've gotten it, and then I'm going to reach out to them and see if they want to review. Those are my biggest resource for people to go after. Obviously, sometimes they're really busy, but that's a great resource. But that's just a one-on-one. We're just trying to reach out to you to see if you'd like to participate. So it can go both ways, either them reaching out to us or us reaching out to them.
And here I see one final question that popped in, which is about an R15. Like the area grants, do those disqualify you for the ECR?
I want to say, I think that they do, but I am not totally clear on that. And the reason I'm not totally clear is the R15s are a little bit unusual because they're really undergraduate institutions, and they're written not as an individual. I mean, it's an individual research grant, but you're really providing a service for undergraduates to do research in the lab. So that one I'd have to double check on for the R15s.
Awesome. So any last pieces of wisdom that you'd like to leave the panel with?
I don't know if my email is anywhere on my presentation. I don't know if I put it on anywhere, but I'd be happy to, if Mallory, or if you want to make
Mallory can drop it in the chat. She's very good at that.
So please feel free to reach out. I vowed when I moved over to CSR from academia that I would be a resource and I would make the whole process more transparent. I wish I'd had someone that I could have contacted for my own grant reviews, or even as a reviewer, that I would have reached out more to my SRO to ask questions. They really would have been probably more than happy to answer my questions. I was just a little bit too shy. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. I'd be happy to help, and I'll give any feedback back to the ECR program. And I really encourage you to participate if you can.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your insights. And I think like I said, it's so important to personify the approachable, member of NIH, because people often are intimidated, scared to reach out. And really, you guys are here to help. So thanks so much to the panel for being here. Thanks to ASB&B for hosting the panel. Thanks, Mallory, for being in charge of everything. And we hope you guys will take some of this advice, and we hope you guys will reach out if you have questions or feedback. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much. Mallory, do you want me to answer any of the chats offline at all, or?
I think we covered most everything.
Okay.
If I offered that if anybody had further questions, they could either direct them to me. Now they have your email, so they can also direct them directly
Perfect.
to you if they feel comfortable. We also have a newsletter. Our ASBMB offers an advocacy newsletter that contains a lot of resources and also funding announcements. So this is a great way to keep tabs with other things that we're doing at ASB and other ways that we can be of service to you guys.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and actually that was one final question. Someone did say, like, I'm early career but not eligible yet. Are there ways that I can keep apprised? And I said, reach out, follow ASBNB, but NIH also has, and CSR I think has newsletters as well. So
yeah,
stay abreast.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you guys.
Thank